Good afternoon. It's so hard to believe that we're already at the end of the second day of TPS already, but man, is it going by fast. So I'd like to introduce myself and my panelists here. My name is Dr. Derek Cohen. My friends call me Jeremy. Also, I would like to announce that we had a little bit of a shuffling on the stage, but we're going to kind of just go through anyway. But anyway, yes, Dr. Derek Cohen. And one of the things that we are looking to do here is to talk about the Texas Family Initiative. You know, Pope John Paul II called the family the first and vital cell of society. And, you know, we heard in Greg's remarks yesterday that that is actually what we hope to seize on with the Texas Policy Initiative. So much like every other initiative that TPPF has engaged in, we are not only recognizing this necessity, this need to actually firm up this element of society, but also to do so in a way that grows the tent, that brings in more people, and actually leads to a bigger, stronger Texas. So, you know, our initiative, it recognizes that family institutions are increasingly under assault. The modern left has fully embraced a vision of society in which a nuclear family is all but abolished and the children are raised by the state. You know, looking at the world in which we live in, evidence is mounting that they are succeeding. We have seen, despite efforts of my colleagues like James Quintero, birth rates falling, marriage rates falling, and we tend not to see anybody pushing back against that, and that's the role that we hope to play here. So again, we're going to take this with a more of a happy warrior approach, and that's going to be what we're going to talk about here today. Kind of our vision of Texas is one of hope, you know, one of not of despair, one where we see every day the resolve to make that vision a reality. And I'm honored to be joined up here by three outstanding leaders in this particular space, and we're going to have that discussion. Starting off immediately to my left is Representative Candy Noble, who's in her fourth term representing House District 89. Representative Noble serves on the House Committees for Human Services, Ways and Means, and is the Vice Chair for the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Property Tax Appraisal. So people might be mobbing you after this, regardless of what we say about families. Throughout her career, Representative Noble has been a leading champion of education and other issues impacting children and families. She is a graduate of Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene and serves on the Board of Trustees. Representative Noble and her husband of 41 years, Robert, are the proud parents of 3 daughters and grandparents of 9 grandchildren. So at the very least, that's a credential in her favor for this discussion. Absolutely. And then on the far end there, we have Senator Tan Parker, who is in his second term representing Senate District 12 in the Texas Senate. We knew you as a House District member for quite some time before that too, sir. Previously, he served 8 terms in the Texas House of Representatives. In the Senate, he serves as Vice Chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice, very important committee, and Veterans Affairs, as well as the Education, Natural Resources, and State Affairs Committee. As a Senator, Tan is passionate about working for the betterment of all Texans, especially the most vulnerable. He graduated from the University of Dallas and earned a master's degree from the London School of Economics and had a distinguished private sector career in technology and private equity. A committed family man, Senator Parker is married to his college sweetheart, Beth, and is a proud father of 2 daughters. Welcome, Senator Parker. And last but certainly not least is Professor Mark Regnerus, is the sociology professor here at the University of Texas at Austin. We don't have very many University of Texas at Austin professors speak at our events. Just making that observation. Anywho, he's also the president of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. His research in the areas of marriage, family, sexual behavior, and religion is highly respected across the globe. Dr. Regnerus is the author of 4 books and over 40 published articles and book chapters. His most recent book, The Future of Christian Marriage, examines the state of matrimony in global Christian circles and sheds the light on changing views of young people towards marriage. So once again, let me get a round of applause for all our panelists. So, Doctor, before we come off of you, I'd really like to ask that since your research focuses on areas of marriage, family, and sexual behavior and religion, you know, will you help set the stage for our conversation, telling us basically what your research is showing about the current health of America's marriages and families?
It's a big question. I could probably sit and lecture for half an hour, 45 minutes, and take up the rest of this slot, but I'll give you a short version. So, One could say, well, it's complicated, but marriage rates are declining. They've been declining about a percentage point a year for the last 40 years. Average age at marriage is rising. That's not inherently a problem, but I'd say the two are tracking together. Divorce rate has declined some, usually in part because fewer people are getting married, and so they're less at risk for divorce. So we could celebrate the lower divorce rate, but we know where that came from. So it does vary across the states. Texas is kind of usually in a middling sort of position on both marriage rates and divorce rates. Of course, Nevada is always highest on marriage rate, usually followed by Hawaii, for predictable reasons, just people are getting married there. But so we have part of the problem around marriage is cultural, and part of it is economic, right? But I think the cultural problem is more entrenched than the economic one is. People want to be able to afford marriage, but increasingly our idea of what marriage ought to look like is becoming more and more expensive, not just in the wedding, but in the sort of the idea of what a married couple should look like, and where should they live, and what they should be doing for a living. And so one of the things I say in my book is that I think sort of a marriage absence, particularly in working class and lower class communities, has become what I consider is the social justice issue of our time. Now, saying that on UT's campus doesn't get you very far. But I'm convinced that marriage absence is a serious problem in the United States for children, but also sort of for adult well-being and health. There are deaths of despair that we hear about, and those are rising, especially among men aged 45 to 65. And often those are combined with the fact that they're not married. People aren't looking after them, right? So there's lots of things around marriage that are valuable and good for people. They're good for children, and yet we're picking against it. Nobody's forcing us not to get married. So there's an entrenched culture problem around how people think about marriage, the pathway to it, what it should look like, what it should feel like. And that's one of those things that is tough to handle with legislation. On the other hand, I think affordability of housing, taxes and things like that is something that matters. I think about my own children. My oldest, he's 25, got married a year and a half ago, new granddaughter for us. Would love to afford a house somewhere in the greater Austin area, right? Both he and his wife work. Our granddaughter shows up at our house at 7 o'clock in the morning until a little after 1 o'clock, which is fine. We're happy to do it. But like, how in the world can they get a footprint on a house? Can she afford to stay at home with the kids like she wants to, and like her mother did, and like her mother-in-law did? So these are the kinds of areas where policy seems to make a difference. But there's plenty about marriage where it's not just about policy. It's about entrenched cultural ideas, myths, some of which are not good. I'll stop there.
Excellent. Well, thank you, sir. So, Senator Parker, you've been a longtime champion for marriage and family, and I'd like to ask you, in light of the professor's remarks, basically, why are those two institutions of marriage and family, so valuable in today's society?
Well, first of all, let me just thank you all for coming and being a part of this. I want to thank TBPF for the opportunity to talk about this. All too often in conservative circles, we talk about fiscal matters, we talk about security matters, we talk about all those kind of things, but we don't talk about the family. And the family, for me, is always the fundamental building block of society. Everything that we have, everything, every economic blessing, every liberty, all that we have really comes from that fundamental unit, which to me is the heart and soul of Western civilization. And so that's where I start in terms of its importance. And so we've got to understand the sanctity of marriage, and we got to address all these issues that are very, very complex and unpack them. The professor gave you a great overview of what's taking place. And I obviously am concerned with the decline in, obviously, marriage rates. I'm the declining birth rate. All these things are very real, and we're not running from them. However, I'm optimistic about the future. And I think it's important that we as conservatives take that vantage point. Being a conservative, to me, really is about optimism for the future, along with all the other things that we believe in terms of traditional values and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, everything that we learn, everything that we value in society is learned inside that family dynamic by a child with parents, right? Integrity, honor, faith, hard work. Everything that we value in society happens as a construct, a byproduct, if you will, of having two healthy parents, of having the ability to grow up in that kind of an environment. And so that is the ideal, and we need to not walk away from striving for the ideal, which is more marriages for more Texans. Now, what's going on beyond what the professor said? I think there's this huge cultural push, particularly with younger people. And so this is where we need to talk to our kids and our grandkids about a lot of things. First and foremost, let me say this. We're in a culture today where we believe in instant gratification. We want everything. You have kids today that are coming out of college at 22 and they expect to make $100,000 a year. You have kids today coming out of school that expect to have a home and 2 cars and all these things immediately, and it takes time. I will only speak for myself for a moment, but when Beth and I started, my wife and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary in August, like most couples, we were college sweethearts. We got married right out of college. I took her off the market, so to speak, when I graduated from UD, and was engaged when I went overseas to go to graduate school before coming back. And we got married upon my graduation from grad school. But the point being is that, we didn't start off in a beautiful $1 million home. We didn't start off with all the trappings of luxury and all the things that we take today for granted and that young people expect. And so I think it's a big part of the culture to say, you know what? It's okay to struggle. It's okay to have to work hard, to save money, to make ends meet, to be able to get going. Because in the end of the day, in terms of a marriage, those things bring you closer to one another as a couple. And when you're rooted in faith, when you focus on Christ as the heart and soul of your life and all that you are as a couple, as a people, as a future family, you can weather the storms of challenge, and it's a growing experience. So culturally, we've got to address that and talk about it in real and open terms. That's the first thing. And then beyond that, of course, why is it so important? Well, we realize what the byproduct ultimately is of marriage. Kids that grow up in a 2-parent home, we do so much better. They are psychologically better. Their mental health is much stronger on balance. Their economic earning power throughout life is much higher. Their educational attainment level is much higher. All of these things we know come from a healthy marriage and family dynamic. And so from my perspective as a policymaker, I can't, as the professor said, I wish I could, but I can't go and legislate morality broadly. But I certainly can address a lot of things. What we did with the life movement in this state, for example, was critically important to protect life from conception to natural death and everything in between. Vitally important. Because if you don't teach your children about the most fundamental value to the sanctity of life, then talking about liberty and freedom and all the things that we espouse as conservatives doesn't really add up. Right? Fundamentally, life is where it all begins. And so, great policy that we followed. Texas has been a leader on stopping the abortion movement, and I'm proud of what we've done. We've been working hard to restore God and faith into the public square, into our schools, and so forth. In the Senate last session, we had 3 bills that dealt with prayer. Phil King had one on the 10 Commandments. Mays Middleton and I had one on school prayer. All 3 of those bills are moving to the Senate this session. We'll get them to the House, and I know our dear friend Representative Noble will help us to get those things done. But you've got to talk about God and faith, and you got to do it openly in the public square. We cannot kick God out of government in our lives and expect to be blessed. So we can go on and on about all these things. And then, of course, from a policy perspective, many of you know that I'm passionate about economic policy. I'm so blessed to carry the legislation that will create the Texas Stock Exchange this session, along with a whole host of other things that we do. All of that drives economic opportunity, which drives prosperity, which enables us to be able to invest and enables us to be able to address these issues around affordable housing and how we address saving and all the other issues that come when we have a fundamental discussion and get really deep about the fundamental building block of society being the American family. So with that, thank you for having me. I'm excited about the conversation and appreciate the chance to be here.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. You can tell you're definitely passionate about that and giving a lot of deep thought. So Representative Noble, my colleague Andrew Brown has had the honor of working with you over many sessions on matters of foster care reform. And I think that it's, when you're talking about a family encountering a foster care system, usually depending on which side of it's on, it's either not a very good day for that family or a very good day for that family on the other side. But it also focuses on restoration as well. So what do you think, the contribution to the decline in marriages, because obviously that contributes to some of the foster issues as well, and family formation rate. If you could put a cause on some of these negative trends, we'll say, what do you think they are?
It's a great question. So in Collin County, where I live, there's an apartment complex that's for single moms. But guess what drives in and out of there all day long? Men, right? So when we make a social issue a housing availability issue, then we have really caused the effect that we're going to have in the long run. And honestly, as a young woman, it's 100 years ago, when I was graduating from Hardin-Simmons University and Robert was at Texas Tech, and he said, why don't you move to Lubbock and teach school? I said, I'm not related to anybody in Lubbock. I'm not moving up there. And that's when we got engaged and got married. And so, ladies, we should expect better. We should expect better. So I'm sad for the young women that have been sold a bill of goods that career comes first, I comes first, he comes first, when really if the Lord comes first and you do his plan, all of those things fall into place in the long run. I'm a weird bird because I think I told every boy I ever dated, this is kind of strange, that I was going to stay home and raise my kids, and that was because I had a mom that worked and I knew what that was like, and which was unusual in my lifetime, and so and I did, and guess what? It didn't hurt me at all when it came to fulfilling my mission field here in the Texas House. And you can have it all, but what your all needs to be under the umbrella of what is right for you, your family, your children, and as a Christian, it has to be under the marriage umbrella, if that is what God has called you to do. So I'm just saying that we can have it all, but you got to get it right in the right order.
Well, at the very least, ma'am, you could say that you put truth in advertising on that. So, but Professor Regners, I wanted to ask you, in your newest book, The Future of Christian Marriage, you actually identify how not only, that marriage decline is not necessarily like a secular phenomenon, that we actually see that within religious communities as well. And I think that that's obviously, puts additional alarm bells up there. So why do you think we are seeing those kind of track in that similar pattern?
There's a couple of reasons for that. When I did this book on Christian marriage, I went to 7 different countries interviewing people, trying to figure out what is the distinctive nature of Christian marriage. And one of the conclusions of that book is that, I don't know that there's such a thing as Christian marriage that people have their mind about. Across the globe, Christians value what most people understand as marriage more than non-Christians do. And yet, they are prone to some of the same kinds of patterns of both behavior and mentality around it that everybody else is. There's clearly a sort of emerging, almost chronic uncertainty about the development of relationships. I mean, I didn't experience that. My oldest 2 children haven't experienced that. But I look around me, and lots of young people just have crippling unclarity about like where is this relationship going, right? And how do I have confidence that it's going somewhere and that we're on a pathway towards marriage rather than this sort of nebulous, unclear where we're at territory. So you have that, but you also have the idea of marriageability, which is long associated with, can he hold down a job, right? And is that job stable? Okay? It used to be sort of fairly bare bones what marriageability was. It was concerned man's earning power. That's kind of much more complicated territory today, right? Marriageability now, involves, well, what does she bring to the union? Does she actually need his money? How stable is his work? Does he make enough money to make me happy? So there's a lot more complexity to sort of discerning what this is a marriageable person than there used to be. And so it takes people longer. And then I think, well, as you wait longer to marry, you're going through the most fertile years of your life, women. So you have more at stake quickly than he does. He may be slow to getting around to marrying, but he's not going to be slow to getting around to start a sexual relationship if he can help it. So there's this kind of dynamic that happens where she starts to make compromises because she's betting on the future of a relationship that is kind of meandering towards somewhere. So she has a lot of anxiety about this. And then he's not in a hurry necessarily. So there's a lot of uncertainty that sort of stalks relationships, especially in their mid to upper 20s. When men hit 30, it's not a big deal to them. When women hit 30, it's kind of a big deal to them on this track. So for Christians, it is by degree different. By degree. Not radically different, but by degree. So one of the things that I talked about in the book is this idea that people used to marry as setting a foundation for their adult life, right? I grew up in Iowa. It was just sort of what you did when you hit a certain age. And pick somebody around you and go do this, right? So that's kind of the foundational model of marriage, which was fairly effectual for lots of people for a very long time. Now that's much, much less common. It's not absent, but it is much less common than the idea of marriage as a capstone, right? It's not the thing you build an adult life with. It's the thing that you try to become marriageable in your young adult years, right? You need to work, you need to get a footprint on a house or a condo, of course, a car, a good job, finish your education. All these ladders, steps in the ladder you have to climb before you become marriageable. That's somebody that becomes something that somebody else would want to go home with, right? So the mentality around marriage has changed from one of a foundation for the adult life course. This is where you experience some temporary poverty, which most of us did if we married young. Now it's sort of like, poverty is a signal that you're not ready for marriage, and that maybe marriage isn't even for you, which I think is a disastrous mentality. So now you think like, I need to achieve these things because marriage is a capstone. It's the icing on the cake, which also signals that you don't actually need it, right? Whereas a foundational approach, like you marry because this is the only way you're going to accomplish things together in life, right? You divide tasks. People pick what they feel like doing. Yes, more often than not, it means she stays home for a while, maybe for quite a while, right? But that mentality is increasingly absent, including among Christians, right? So again, by degree. So that's kind of the state of where we're at and why Christians do esteem marriage more. I say in the book that marriage is becoming more of a religious thing. in the future because Christians are the ones who are valuing it, right? Non-Christians, still plenty of them marry, but fewer than before, later in life. But across the board, everybody's having fewer children, right? And so thrown into this mix, too, is the kind of, are children an essential component of marriage in our mentality, or are they not? They're increasingly becoming an add-on, whereas, growing up, whether Protestant or Catholic, I felt like, well, children are part of what family is about, right? So things have changed. Christians have changed along with that in many ways, but not quite so much as the rest of the population.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Professor. One more item of housekeeping I did want to mention. We still have a little bit to go in our discussion here, but we want to get y'all plugged in and part of this discussion as well. So as you can see, we have screens here to my sides. You should see a QR code on that screen. If you go to that QR code, you'll have the opportunity to actually register a question with some of our event staff who will then text it to me. So it's not me just playing on my phone. It actually has something to do up here. But they will go ahead and text that question to me, and we can get you plugged into that conversation faster than me trying to have to look out and see folks and them scurry around with microphones, so we can really keep that conversation moving. So if something that has been said already or something that comes up, really just triggers that thing in your mind that makes you want to ask that question, and you feel so moved, please, by all means, go to that QR code and get that question in, so we'll actually be able to get that put in the conversation for the audience question and answer section. So just want to give that quick housekeeping note. So Senator Parker, you mentioned some of the, and actually all three panelists, I should say, have mentioned some of the initial, I would say, headwinds that a marriage can face that usually are external to the marriage itself. Talk about, whether it's housing affordability or just let's say broader economic issues, right? So I don't want to say your boss, but your colleague, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, was up here on the stage earlier touting all the great successes Texas has and why so many people are moving here a day. And so I want to ask you, even with all those great successes and that outstrip other states in many ways, what are some of the areas where we're feeling those pinch points, and what might the 89th legislature be able to do about that?
Well, I know the governor gave you a wonderful overview of all the different challenges that we've had historically and all the things that we've accomplished over the years. We've done some amazing things, and we'll have a great package of bills, obviously, this session. And I'll talk about some of those. But I want to say, just to make a comment here about this previous discussion as well. And that is, this whole concept that you got to be ready for marriage. You got to go through all these ladders, all these checkpoints. This is where the culture has to change. As people of faith, we have to talk to young people about the importance, like I said earlier, of engaging in life earlier. Don't get caught up on those things that you have certain level of income and equity in terms of equity in your home, that you have a certain number of dollars in the bank. We've got to change that mentality. It's great to have all those things, but we fundamentally have to change that culture, or you're going to continue to elongate things. And the other item, of course, we got to just briefly mention, and I'll answer your question, is about men being men. Amen. And what does that mean? To me, that means men need to stand up, step up, and you know what? They need to do the right thing by that young lady that they're dating and realize it's time to make a commitment. And they've got to honor that commitment. That's what we've done for generations. And of course, we know the values and the blessings that have come from that. And so we just can't be shy and not talk about those real issues that are the heart and soul of this whole conversation. Now, with regard to our legislative agenda this session, one of the things I'm very honored to do is to serve as the Republican leader of the Senate, leading the Republican caucus and working closely, of course, with Governor Patrick and all my wonderful Senate colleagues. But look, let's take some of these big items and kind of throw them on the table so you guys know what we're working on. Look, this week we passed the homestead exemption for the people of Texas. That homestead exemption just two cycles ago, was about $40,000. Today, it's now $140,000 with that bill that we just passed out of the Senate. And if you're above 65, it's $150,000. Now, what does that mean? That's a huge impact for people all across this state. People that are working hard to make ends meet, people that are working to get ahead. That extra $100, $200 or more a month makes a big difference, particularly for a young family that gets going. So I wanted to stress the fact that at the end of the day, tax relief matters, first and foremost to homeownership. And you'll see us continue to do that. And I know Representative Noble and our colleagues will work hard to pass that legislation now that we've gotten out of the Senate and the House. Now, outside of that topic, let's talk about the role of regulation for a moment. Regulation is increasing the cost of housing roughly 25%. 25% of that cost of that home you're going to buy is directly tied to regulation, be it federal, be it state, be it local, usually municipalities and so forth. And as a result of that, we've got to address that topic. So we have been addressing these issues as a legislative body over the course of the last several sessions, but we need to continue to do more. And when you talk about a framework, if you're a builder, to go into a patchwork where you've got a different set of goals, I shouldn't say goals, a different set of rules to operate by in every county of the 254 in Texas, it makes it more expensive to operate. And so thereby, what we're trying to do is to pass bills that make sense, that reduce that regulatory burden on the construction industry, so to speak, on builders, so that we can build faster and cheaper. Because when local governments in particular extend the time frame and permitting and all the issues, all it does is add cost to that home for a young family or a family at any stage in life. Then, one of the things you'll see us focus on this session, as I mentioned earlier, about the stock exchange, for example. What is the stock exchange all about? It's really all about jobs. It's really all about economic prosperity. It's about creating really hundreds of thousands of new jobs, in my mind, will be created, not just from the Texas Stock Exchange, but from creating a new environment in Texas where we focus on capital markets and we become more diverse than what we've been historically. And it's the strength and the diversity of our economy that enables us to weather storms better than any other state in the country. That's why you've seen more job creation over the course of the last 10, 12, 15 years in Texas than virtually all the other states combined. And it's why we have a savings rate at our state treasury, so to speak, what we call the rainy day fund, that is much more significant, frankly, than the vast majority of all the other states combined, historically. So that's because of economic prosperity and following good policies. Leadership matters in terms of addressing the challenges that we face. And when we're doing these things with regard to tax relief or regulatory relief, what are we doing? We're really addressing the challenges of the last 4 years. Let me be very candid. The horrific policies of the Biden administration have driven up all the inflation rate beyond anything we've seen in the modern era. We thought it was bad when Jimmy Carter was president, and it was so much worse in terms of really what the numbers were, the real numbers. When there's a real accounting of what happened in that 4-year period, you'll see inflation was higher than any other time in the modern period in this country. People are spending 2 and 3 times more today to live, to pay their grocery bill, to pay their insurance, all those things. And so the role that Texas is playing uniquely is to be a hedge against this horrific runaway spending that the Biden administration passed on to Texas. That's why tax relief mattered. That's why when we gave $18.2 billion of tax relief last session, it's why it mattered. That wasn't our money, that's your money, and we gave it back as we needed to. And we'll give billions of dollars more now with the homestead exemption and a lot of other additional incentives that create good policy economically for Texas. If you have the fundamental underpinnings of prosperity, then we have the ability to talk about liberty and freedom. We have the ability to talk about a workforce that's second to none. School choice, my friends. School choice has now passed the Texas Senate, okay? We passed it many, many times in '23. It didn't make it out of the House, as you all know, but we're hopeful what's going to get done here in the next 30 to 45 days. But what will that do? That will empower students, particularly in poor communities, those that have been stuck in a cycle of welfare and poverty dependence, directly tied to a lack of educational attainment, to have the ability to be upwardly mobile, to live the American dream, to get a job, to be productive. And it's not just about a 4-year degree. One of the things you'll see us talking about with regard to workforce this session, things I'm working on with my colleagues, is focusing on community colleges, vocational schools, apprenticeships. Why? Because you can learn those kind of great skills, blend them with business acumen, and be incredibly successful. So those are things that we are doing along with driving a culture of life, along with addressing the security needs of our state, enabling us as a people to thrive and to succeed. So when I look at policy, it is all-encompassing on things that benefit the family. Truly, everything that Candy and I will pass this session, its objective is to strengthen the family, to help moms be great moms and dads be great dads, to have more time at home. You know, transportation policy, when we invest billions of dollars into new roadways, guess what? Being able to be mobile with regard to transportation here in Texas is a family value. I want our families to be home in the evening to make soccer practice or volleyball or Boy Scouts or Brownies. All of those things all tie back to public policy and strengthening the family ultimately.
Oh, I really appreciate that, Senator. You can definitely, your enthusiasm's infectious on that item. But I'm really glad you brought up some of the housing issues, because in discussing with my colleague Andrew, one of the things that came up, and I'd like you to weigh in on this, Representative Noble, is that you've been hearing some concerns that have to do with home ownership in regards to, or how it interplays with cohabitation. Can you kind of explain that to us?
Yeah, in fact, it was really interesting that the title companies have an association, and they brought to me that they are very, very concerned with the clear titles on people that have bought homes together but are not married. And it's becoming more and more and more complicated for them when they go to closing on a house. And we know, I assume that you have done research that people that cohabitate have less chance of sticking it out in the long run. Is that true? Okay, good. He's the real researcher. But we have made it, we need to make it clear in our Texas law exactly how those assets are going to be divided, and it shouldn't have to be that way when you cohabitate. And they were asking me, like, can you just make it where it's common law at X number of years? Can you just do that for us so that we know what to do? And that's a sad state for us to be in that situation, to be putting businesses in a quandary on how the assets are divided when they go to close a home and close on a something where somebody divided the assets that never really got into a partnership that was recognized by our state. And so it is incumbent on us to make sure that. All right, I have a fellow House member, and they sometimes refer to their significant other as a boyfriend, sometimes as a fiance, and sometimes as a husband. And Matt Shaheen and I have both agreed that we will take her to church to get married, and we'll be bridesmaids. That's what we told her, and. But honestly, we should be able to be clear as a society what those terms mean. And you know what? It's okay for us to speak up and say they are not the same thing. A fiance and a husband are not the same thing. A covenant relationship before God is a very, very different animal. And it should mean something in our laws, and it should mean something in our lives.
Now, ma'am, did I understand you correctly that you just obligated Representative Shaheen to be a bridesmaid?
Yeah, he and I said we'd stand up with him.
That's okay.
Maybe he's a groomsman, but nevertheless.
Very well.
We're going to go with him.
So my colleague Roy in the front here is starting to give me the hook, the wrap it up alarm. So before we go to question and answers, I just want to remind y'all, make sure you get those questions in so we can get you involved as part of this discussion. But just before we turn it over, and I want to stay with you for one last question here, Representative Noble. Before we turn it over to question and answers from the audience, I would like to ask you specifically about HB 2696, because I know obviously that's a bill that you've put a lot of effort into, a lot of thought into. Explain to us kind of what that does and what the rationale is behind it.
I'm assuming you're talking about the Ten Commandment bill.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have all my bill numbers memorized, sadly. No, it's time, y'all. the foundation for our education system in the United States between the New England Primer and the McGuffey Reader, which were in use in the United States for more than 200 years, foundation for that was the Ten Commandments and the Bible. In fact, the Bible was the #1 textbook for most of our ancestors that were literate. And so guess what that taught? It taught respect for authority, respect for others, keep your word, don't lie, don't kill, and when you make a promise, this is the adultery one, when you make a promise, you keep it. And so it's time for us to get that back in the classrooms, y'all. And it's foundational to our judicial system as well. I mean, historically, that is foundational to both our education and our judicial system, and we're shortchanging our students in America if we don't share with them those foundational issues.
I really appreciate it. So that brings us to our question and answer section. We already got some good questions coming in. Obviously, you know, the dance card is not quite full, so make sure that you're putting them in if you have any questions you'd like to ask. But I'd like to throw out the first one that we had just received. So pretty much everybody on this panel has talked, and this is not a question targeted at anybody, but I'd actually like to go to the professor first, and then to our elected officials here. And I want to basically say that a lot of people on this panel, or everyone on this panel, I should say, have talked about, you know, what can we do to kind of the positive good that can buoy the marriage and marriage rate, family formation. Conversely, what can be done to lower the divorce rate?
To lower the divorce rate. Policy, it's a little more challenging. At the same time, like, you can make it more difficult to get it, right? I mean, but the thing is, we've tried this. Louisiana with covenant marriage, it was kind of, I think it was an opt-in. So the default when you got married was like, if you checked the box for the covenant marriage, then it was going to be much more difficult for you to get a divorce down the road. That's different than an opt-out, right? I mean, if you did an opt-out, then you'd automatically have a covenant marriage, making it more difficult to divorce. And you'd have to basically agree with your spouse when you're marrying that, you know what, we're going to check the easy box so that if this doesn't work out, and then she'd be like, wow, what's the matter with you? But that's a problem. Like, to make it an opt-in was tough, right? With everything that you do an opt-in, you know, it has to be conscious, intentional. So one can do that. Covenant marriages have not been a big hit in the United States. It's sad, but it's because there's not enough demand for it, right? But if you put it in front of people and you make it an opt-out, then downstream, for a couple to leave each other, they're going to have to do some things, clear some hurdles around counseling, etc., that will enable them to get a divorce. So I think it makes reasonable barriers. We've never tried that in Texas. Texas has been, frankly, very libertarian about marriage for a very long time. That's one thing I'm not crazy about, is like, marriage is the foundation of society. I was like, I'm not going to be a libertarian about this. It's a fundamental good and necessary part of a good society. So the libertarian approach means we're just not going to get into people's private lives. And I think, you know, left to our own devices, when that happens, sort of the culture that comes through the devices, the televisions, the films, breaks relationships down piece by piece slowly, and we have to fight back on that. And if you can fight with legislation, you got to do it prudently.
Excellent. Senator or Representative, would you like to weigh in? Similar question?
Well, look, I think it's an excellent question, and I don't disagree with the professor that we can look further at legislation in some ways to address the challenge, but I got to be very candid. My view is this is a heart problem. This is a cultural problem. And, you know, and so as a result of that, I really believe that those of us that care about these issues, people of faith, need to mentor more young people, not just your children and your grandchildren, but you need to have a conscious focus that it's a ministry to go and spend time with young people and let them know that life, you should not be treating this concept of a marriage and a lifelong partner as something that's disposable. I want to be very candid. It frustrates me to no end. All of the individuals that I love and care about over the years, all the folks you've walked through, and I know all of the folks in this room have had the same kind of experience, that in my mind, the challenges where they ultimately ended up divorcing were, in my assessment, pretty insignificant. I hate to say trivial, but trivial. Now, that's not to say they're not real reasons for divorce. When you have someone that's horrifically abusive and bad things happen, of course, I agree. Appropriate. Get counseling, get marriage counseling, do all those things. But you just fundamentally got to let people understand that in this world, this fallen world, nothing is perfect and nothing is easy. And you've got to work together, but that's really why that union is so important at the very beginning, that when a couple gets married, it's not just a union condoned by the government of the state of Texas, but it's a union that is blessed by the Lord God Almighty, right? Because that's the only way you have an eternal view of what you're doing here, and that it's not about self, that it's about service, and that service formation starts in your marriage, and it starts with what you do every day of your life in giving back, whatever it may be, whatever journey that God has for you in life. So, yes, I'm open to looking at things we could do legislatively, of course. But again, if you don't fundamentally change the culture and change the human heart, you will not significantly move the needle on this issue. And that's the reason why I think, just like over the years, I've done things with, for example, the Heart Gallery, which was helping to get behind children that are in the custody of the state of Texas and get families that are in every individual church in this state to step up and to get up and adopt one of these precious kids that's in the custody of the state of Texas. The same thing applies here. We need a renewal in our churches to go and reach out to young people and talk about the blessings that come from marriage, from biblical marriage, and for committing and making those decisions at the beginning of your life. Now, look, the Lord, obviously, my wife and I met in our early 20s, and what an incredible blessing for me. Obviously, the Lord has a time and a place. Some people meet that right spouse in their 30s or 40s or later. But that's, beyond our control as human beings. But at the end of the day, it's about changing the culture, and that's what we need to focus on. And I think we need to really focus on how can we specifically get a revival in the American church to address this topic. And that's why I'm bullish, because I think all that we've seen with regard to the success at the ballot box for conservatives in November, the fact that there's a resurgence of the conservative movement, I think the last 10 years, 20 years in this country, I am bullish and optimistic that we will work through these issues and that we will be successful in moving the needle.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to add, the truth is that we have been sold a bill of goods as people, as Americans growing up, that it's all about our own happiness. And guess what? Life is messy. I had a friend tell me one time that she was unhappy in her marriage and God wanted her to be happy. And apparently I said to her, God doesn't want you to be happy. God wants you to be holy. And what does that look like in your marriage? And I don't remember saying it to her, but she's repeated it back to me enough times that I did that I believe that I did it. But you know what? We need to be real about people that are growing up, that a successful marriage is not about being happy. You know what it's about? It's about shared adversity. It's about growing together, and it's about growing closer to the cross. And if you're not doing that, then you're not going to be successful. But you know what? We don't need to just tell our kids and tell folks that the end all is marriage. The end all is growing closer to each other and growing old together, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely, ma'am. And that I do want to. Okay, come on. I don't even need to give you all a please clap. You guys are already on that. So, Professor, I want to ask you another thing. This actually came up with a couple of questions that we had received. essentially, I want to ask about the success sequence. You know, can you give us a little explanation of what the success sequence is and why that's kind of the, you know, as the kids would say, the cheat code to life these days?
Right. The success sequence is basically three things, and they're fairly basic to most of us. You got to finish high school, finish your education, and when you're done with your education, work a full-time job, and marry before you have children. So that's just the basics of it. I've never plowed into that as a social science research topic. Friends of mine have. But when you do those three things, you're much more likely to rise above the poverty line and to live sort of a more flourishing life. That's fairly basic. The things that we've been talking about here are a little bit more complex and both policy related, but also culturally related. But you know, as a starting point, I think the success sequence is fairly obvious, and it's something that can be instructed. School teachers wouldn't have to think like, oh, I'm preaching religion if I'm saying these things. No, you're just basically common sense, right? And this common sense instruction will help people attain the kind of things that they claim that they want, right? So, yeah, I don't deal in the success sequence just because it's not my thing, but it's fairly straightforward.
And yeah, I think that's, you called it common sense. My only addendum to that would be, it's, well, and I wouldn't say statistical certainty, but definitely very high statistical likelihood. My colleague Andrew would tell you something along the lines of, I think it's if you do follow the success sequence, and you hit everything in stride in the order in which it's supposed to be, I think you have, I believe, a 6% chance of ending up below the poverty line. So that just has, obviously, these massive, resonating effects. So now, we actually got a very intricate question, and so I'm going to point this towards you, Representative Noble, because you might be the expert on this area. I'll be the first to admit that I certainly am not. So, how are we balancing reconciliation in the foster system with giving young children an opportunity to have a new family?
That's a great question.
So whoever asked that, that's a great question.
Yeah. It might have been somebody from TPPF because they actually helped me. I did a bill last session. I love it. I love this bill. We actually had families who had children taken away and into the foster care system, and the parents had certain requirements that they were having to meet in order to be reconciled with those children, and they might be family counseling. It might be family preservation or kind of those kind of things, or it could be a psych evaluation. But it was taking them up to 18 months to get those services because they had to go to a contracted provider with the state. And we passed a bill that said that those families could go to anybody that is qualified, any psychiatrist, anyone that's qualified to do those kind of services and get them done in order to be reconciled with their children quicker. The goal, of course, being that children have their stable, permanent position, whether it's permanently with an adopted family or permanently back with their moms and dads, and that is the goal of us, as it should be all of our goals, to have permanency for those children.
Yes, ma'am, and we're kind of coming up on time, but I want to give a quick one really quick before we move on. In part company for the day to Senator Parker. Senator, I would like to ask, does the state have a vested interest in instilling values and faith into our children, and what are some ways to make sure that the next generation has Texas values?
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, Texas has to instill these values in every way, right? And that's why we're trying to promote these things. So, you know, I'm so happy that Candy's picking up the bill on the 10 Commandments. And like I said earlier, Mays Middleton and I both have a bill on prayer. Mine basically codifies the Kennedy decision as a building block for additional prayer in the schools. But this is fundamental. This is fundamental, that we've got to teach children about their biblical history. We've got to let them know that God loves them. And the only way you can start doing that is spending time with the Lord. And so the opportunity to have prayer again in our schools and to have a reference specifically every day to the 10 Commandments will, I think, dramatically change the way that people think about where they are. Children need that guidance. They need that direction. And we got to be proud of our history in Texas. You know, one of the things I passed in 2021 was the Texas 1836 project. You know why? Because, thank you. You know, the reason why I passed that bill, I was so angry because President Biden was one of the great clown moves of his first week in office. He canceled President Trump's 1776. Why? Why would you cancel the history of America? And so I said nonsense here in my office in Austin. I said, Texas will lead like we lead in everything. And we will lead in the preservation and the protection of our Texas history. Why? What do we believe? We believe in limited government. We believe in free enterprise. We believe in these enduring foundational principles that the founders of our nation and the founders of the state enshrined into our incredible documents that gave us this incredible fragile experiment with democracy at the federal level and this incredible state that we're blessed to live in. Yeah. And so my point is we preserve our history for all of our kids, not just in the 7th grade, but for everybody that moves to Texas now with the 1836 project. You know, you can't think that these things are going to be automatically passed on. President Reagan realized this. That was his rallying cry. We would talk about the fact that these elements are not passed down through the bloodstream. Freedom, liberty, an understanding of the democracy that we're so blessed to live in. The fundamental rights that we're given, that our rights come from God. All of those things are not a given, and unless we instruct and educate our kids, they'll miss the boat. So we're going to continue to do more civics education in Texas. You can look for that. You're going to see us continue to drive the story of Texas and all the uniqueness of Texas. And we're going to drive the family and the fact that success comes when you make the right formative steps in your life. That you start a family and that you build your fundamental relationship on Christ. And if God blesses you with children, terrific. If he doesn't, terrific. But at the end of the day, God is in control, God is sovereign, and we got to focus on what is fundamental. And so I'm excited about the future. Like I said, I want to just give a shout out to Andrew for a moment to let you know the great work he's done over the years. You know, we're just talking about a technical question that Candy got a moment ago. One of the bills I did a couple years ago with Andrew is one of the ones I really, of all the hundreds of bills I've been blessed to pass over the years, with your support, with the support of TPF and all the great conservatives in the state, was one that allowed families, once the parental rights have been severed, think about that for a moment. When a parental right has been severed because the parent was so awful, atrocious things, Texas now leads the country with a bill that now allows over a number of years and lots of safeguards by counselors, by pastors, by judges, and so forth, because we believe in second chances. If a human being has the opportunity to get their act together and can be a good parent, again, to that precious little boy or precious little girl, I want to be able to reunite that family. That bill I passed with Andrew's help and guidance is now the model for the country. And every year, 1 or 2, maybe 3 families are reunited because of that legislation. Leadership matters, policy matters. And the final thing I want to say is a shout out to Andrew as well as the TPPF, is that you all supported a book that I created called Making Government Work a couple years ago. I don't make any money on that book. It all goes to charity. And the original Making Government Work was done by the original founder of TPPF, under Dr. Leininger, the first president, I should say, my mentor, Tex Lazar, who went on to be the Assistant Attorney General of the United States under President Reagan. But in the modern version of Making Government Work, I did a chapter with Chad Hennings on the topic of the family. And it's a fun book. It's a great topic. I've got free copies. Anybody that wants one, come to the office and get one. But I want to thank TPPF. I haven't had that opportunity for their support of that book and promoting it and working with Andrew and so many other incredible conservatives on not just the family, but all the other conservative elements that really comprise our framework for how we move America forward through the basis of federalism.
Well, Senator Parker, let me echo the praise for my colleague Andrew Brown and also be the first to say, excuse me, how lucky we are to have such a great panel. So before we go, just want to remind you, 5:30 M2 if you're going. Also, see Clint if you have any questions about that. But before we adjourn, one last round of applause for our panelists.